But cognitive psychologists and neuroscientists believe, and remember, because I am a lawyer and not a scientist, I am sparing you the tiresome complexities and equivocations with which an actual scientist would burden you. That at least when people are trying to reason about something they care about, they engage in motivated reasoning. That is, the chart would look more like this. People begin with their conclusion, and then they figure out the reasons to support it. A psychologist called Jonathan Haidt explains, the human brain acts not like a scientist, but like a lawyer, looking for the strongest arguments for positions already taken. A high compliment indeed for the human brain. The scientists use capital punishment, gun control, and abortion as examples of topics leading to motivated reasoning. But of course, what do they know from motivated reasoning? I mean, we are talking here about Jews arguing over food. And the problem is not merely that people decide first and then come up with reasons later. Once people have established a preference, or as the economists would like to call it, a taste for the latke or the hamentaschen, they screen out information contradicting their preference at a very early stage in their cognitive processing. The latke supporters subject arguments in favor of the hamentaschen to much more rigorous scrutiny, finding all the weaknesses in the opponent's logic, but not in the logic of those they agree with. And you've certainly seen that tonight. And vice versa. This is called biased assimilation. And in fact, the people who begin with a preference for the latke will really only listen to those who are also identified as latke supporters. They will reject the arguments of hamentaschen identified speakers without really hearing them. This is called attitude polarization. Now, let's look at a diagram of the brain, which, as I promised, will give this presentation an aura of authoritativeness. What do you notice? What I notice is that almost every part of the brain looks like a potato. That doesn't look like a potato is the brainstem, which looks kind of like a hamentaschen. This is significant because these potato-shaped areas are involved in all the higher forms of reasoning: memory, language, priority setting, planning for the future. So we might call this higher reasoning potato-based reasoning. Or reasoning with extra fries. The brainstem is the simplest, most primitive part of the brain, the lowest part of the brain. So we might call this primitive, reflexive kind of processing dough-based reasoning. And here's a slide of that. We might, but that would be wrong. After constructing, as you have heard, a nearly airtight argument in favor of the latke based on this evidence, I realized that I too was engaged in motivated reasoning. Because of my pre-existing preference for latkes, that crisp, juicy, most delicious of foods, especially with sour cream, I was giving too much credence to the evidence in their favor and subjecting the evidence for the soggy, saccharinely sweet excuse for a pastry we call hamentaschen to a higher standard. The truth of the matter is that none of us are reasoning here in the way that reasoning is commonly understood. This hard truth brings with it a small, inconvenient bit of collateral damage. It destabilizes, or more accurately, eviscerates, the central foundational assumptions on which the common law system is built. That we reason from premises to conclusion, that precedent guides us, and that the truth will eventually prevail. That is, the inexorable result of taking this argument to its logical conclusion will be to declare the legal system a free-for-all ruled by unchecked passions, naked power grabs, and pre-Magna Carta anarchy. But for those who have been able to follow my complex scientific explanation, you have no doubt already grasped the beauty of this construct. We need not, and in fact cannot, follow our argument to its logical conclusion. The downside is way too negative. We will do as we have always done and ignore this inconvenient evidence. This is known as cognitive dissonance, or as the president calls it, policy. But even if we were to exhibit the courage of our convictions here and accept the consequences of the revelation that legal reasoning, and indeed all reasoning, is a touchingly optimistic but empirically bankrupt fiction, I submit that this is a small price to pay, at least for those of us with tenure, for at last solving the mystery of why the Latke-Hamantash Debate has for so long defied resolution.